The ledger my mother hid in her dresser proved they stole my tuition for mafia debts, and it changed everything in court. College was supposed to be midterms and coffee, not secrets and threats. One phone call on a quiet afternoon flipped my life inside out, and then the voice on the line shattered everything I thought I knew. What? I couldn't believe what I heard. I'd spent the entire day falling in love with my classes. Introduction to Psychology, where the professor made us giggle while discussing Freud. Creative Writing, where we'd already begun working on short tales. And Statistics, which appeared interesting with the right teacher. I was sitting on a seat outside the library, feeling as if my life was finally starting, when they called. My mother's speech seemed unusually upbeat for someone wrecking my future. "We need you to listen carefully, honey. We can't pay for school anymore. What happened to the college savings account you've had for me since I was a baby?" My voice sounded raspy. They would show me the statements on my birthdays, see the numbers climb, and use them as encouragement when I didn't want to prepare for the SATs. The money was supposed to be precious and untouchable, mine. There was a moment before my father cleared his throat. "I had some problems. We're going to need all of the money back to pay some debts." Which was unusual because she didn't specify what kind of obligations. Then what am I supposed to do? I felt like throwing up. My mother jumped back in with her solution. "You need to find a rich boyfriend by the end of the month. You go to school with plenty of wealthy students and you have a good body, so it wouldn't be impossible for you to get a boyfriend to turn into a husband." I sat there shocked as she continued talking. She outlined their entire strategy as if she had planned it through thoroughly. How I should target males in business school, how I should dress more revealingly, and how I should laugh at their jokes even if they were not humorous. "If you don't break up with him, even if he cheats on you, you'll be able to return to school in 6 years." She said it as if 6 years were nothing. Unable to believe what was happening, I hung up without saying goodbye. My palms shook as I scrolled to my brother Aiden's number. He finished from law school last year and was always able to mend things. He picked up on the second ring. "They just told me they can't pay for college and I need to find a rich husband. Is this really happening?" I was trying to prevent myself from crying. Aiden gave a big sigh. "They did the same thing to me when I started college, and I believed them." "What?" Things kept getting worse. He stated that 7 years earlier, they phoned him with the same story. Same strange debts. Same ridiculous solution. But he was too proud to marry for money, so he dropped out and began working as a welder to save up. He spent years breathing fumes and burning his hands in order to eventually pay for his own law school. "Why didn't you tell me?" I inquired. "I thought maybe they'd changed. Maybe they'd learned. I kept hoping they weren't going to do it to you too." The way he spoke was cruel. We sat silently for a moment. I saw other students passing by with their backpacks and coffee cups, leading regular college lives rather than being told by their own parents to sell themselves to the highest bidder. "There's something else you need to know," Aiden finally said. "Our parents have ties with the mafia." The mafia? Like the actual mafia? This was insane. Dad's gambling was not at casinos. He owes money to some extremely scary individuals. That is why they need your college cash. That's why they're desperate enough to propose this husband idea. My brain was unable to digest this information. My parents, who drove a minivan and attended church on Sundays, were involved with organized crime. My father, who wore polo shirts and delivered lousy jokes, owed money to real criminals. "So what do we do?" I inquired. Aiden's voice became hushed, as if he wanted to ensure that no one could overhear. "I have a plan to get your money back, but it's going to take both of us, and you have to trust me completely." "What kind of plan?" I needed more information. "Not over the phone. Can you drive home this weekend? We'll meet at my apartment, and I'll explain everything. Just, whatever you do, don't let Mom and Dad know we talked. Act like you're considering their marriage plan." "Aiden, you're scaring me." "Good. You should be scared. These people don't mess around. But I'm not letting them steal your future like they stole mine. We're going to fix this." I ended the conversation and sat on the bench for another minute, my entire body shaking. Students continued passing past me as if nothing had changed, but everything was different now. My legs felt wobbly as I stood up and walked back to my dorm. The facility felt too light and too noisy as everyone prepared for Friday night gatherings. I made it to my room, closed the door behind me, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. My class schedule stared back at me from the screen. Introduction to Psychology on Mondays and Wednesdays, Creative Writing on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Statistics 3 times each week. My parents owed money to actual criminals, thus I might not be able to finish my classes. My hands were still shaking as I grabbed my phone and began erasing everything: call history with mom and dad, text messages, etc. I updated all of my passwords one by one, making them longer and more random: my email password, my banking password, etc. Creating a new email account took a while because I kept pressing the wrong keys. My fingers wouldn't work properly. Aiden had encouraged me to download Signal for messaging, so I went to the App Store and set it up with a username rather than my phone number. I texted him that I'd drive to visit him tomorrow, and he responded with a thumbs up. Then my regular email chimed with a new letter from the bursar's office, reminding me that tuition was due in 3 weeks, $30,000 for the semester. Money that my parents had accumulated for 17 years was stolen and used to pay criminals. I felt nauseous after staring at the number. I forwarded it to my new secure email address and erased it from my regular inbox. My roommate arrived around midnight, inebriated and joking about a party. She passed out on her bed, and I laid there staring at the ceiling. Down the corridor, I could hear people laughing and conversing about everyday topics. Someone was grumbling about a chemical test, and another was talking about asking a girl out. They were concerned with typical college issues, whereas I was prepared to discreetly record my own parents. Despite the fact that this building was filled with hundreds of people, I felt absolutely alone. My alarm went off at 7 o'clock, so I must have fallen asleep at some time. My roommate was still unconscious, so I moved carefully, bringing out the small suitcase from beneath my bed. I packed the folder I'd been storing since high school with all of my college savings documents. They'd shown me the statements every birthday, and I'd saved copies and screenshots of their texts guaranteeing the money was mine. Photos of parents at my high school graduation, emphasizing how delighted they were that I had gotten a full tuition to my safety school, but they preferred that I attend my dream school. Everything that showed that money existed and was intended for me. I texted Aiden on Signal that I was leaving at midday, as scheduled. My roommate asked where I was going. When I told her I was visiting family for the weekend, she mumbled something about having fun before falling back asleep. I also tossed some clothes in the bag before heading to my car. The drive to Aiden's place normally takes 2 hours, but I kept checking my mirrors. About 30 minutes in, I observed a dark car that had followed me since I left college. Not directly behind me, but perhaps 3 or 4 cars back. When I changed lanes, the lanes changed. When I took the Route 85 exit, it took the identical one. My heart began thumping. I remembered the license plate and took an unexpected turn for a rest stop. The sedan followed. I drove into the rest stop and parked near the building, watching the sedan park a few rows away. Nobody got out. I called Aiden, attempting to maintain a steady voice. He urged me to get back on the highway and continue driving to his house as if everything was normal. He advised me not to try to lose them because that would let them know I had noticed. So I got back in my car and drove the rest of the way, keeping that sedan 3 cars behind me. When I eventually arrived at Aiden's apartment building, the vehicle drove past and turned at the next intersection. I grabbed my suitcase and ran inside. Aiden was waiting at his door and hugged me the moment he spotted me. I hadn't cried before, but now I couldn't stop. He held me as I sobbed into his shirt, everything from the previous day hitting me at once. When I eventually calmed down, he led me into his kitchen, where he had filled the entire table with paperwork, bank statements, printed emails, and images of documents. He'd spent months, if not years, gathering evidence concerning our parents. We laid everything out and began arranging by date. Aiden showed me his laptop, where he had created a spreadsheet monitoring every deposit and withdrawal from my college account. The withdrawals corresponded to periods he had marked in red on a calendar. He described his strategy while we were sorting papers: document everything, record interactions, and develop a legal case. He pulled out his phone's recording app and demonstrated how to utilize it. Then he handed me a small microphone that was clipped inside my jacket collar and barely visible. We practiced turning it on and off so I could do it without looking. He'd scribbled down the contact information for 2 people who could assist us. Evelyn Carter worked in financial assistance at my school and had dealt with emergency situations. Lucas Grant was a detective who specialized in organized crime cases, and Aiden recognized him from previous legal work for the police agency. Knowing the names of those who could help made everything seem less impossible. After we'd sorted everything and made copies, Aiden asked me to sit across from him at the table. He pretended to be our parents while I practiced being calm and asking appropriate questions. We went through it several times, and he taught me what terms to use to elicit legally useful responses. Sunday morning, I awoke on Aiden's couch, my neck stiff from the odd angle, and took out my phone to look up the school's financial aid office number. The website stated that they opened at 8 a.m. on Monday, but I discovered an email address for someone named Evelyn Carter, who handled emergency cases. So I typed out a note indicating that I had a family financial situation and needed immediate assistance. My hands shook as I typed, because writing it down made everything seem more real, and I had to delete and redo the email 3 times before it sounded normal. Aiden emerged from his bedroom with coffee and sat next to me, while I attached copies of all the bank statements we'd gathered, proving the college fund existed and was intended for me. He assisted me in writing a brief summary explaining why my parents stole the money, without mentioning the mafia or gambling debts, as that would sound too strange for a first email. Within an hour, Evelyn responded, saying she could meet me Monday at 7:30 before regular office hours, which meant I'd have to leave university early, but at least I'd get aid. I packed all of the documents into a folder and drove back to college that afternoon, with Aiden following me for the first 30 minutes to ensure no one was following me this time. Back in my dorm room on Sunday night, I sat on my bed for 10 minutes, staring at my phone, before messaging Mom that I'd been thinking about what she said and wanted to know more about finding a boyfriend. She called right away, and her voice was all thrilled, as if I had just told her I had won the lotto or something, as she began reciting all these directions about which dining halls the business school guys ate at and what times they went to gym. I activated the recording app Aiden showed me and held the phone slightly away from my ear so the microphone could take up everything, while she advised me to wear tighter clothes and laugh more, even if nothing was funny. She went on for 20 minutes about how I should pretend to be interested in whatever they were talking about, never disagree with them about anything, and always let them believe they were smarter than me. Then Mom said something that made my stomach drop. Dad's friend Victor knew some rich families with sons my age who might be interested in meeting me. She mentioned his name casually, as if he were a normal family acquaintance rather than a criminal to whom my father owed money, and I had to bite my tongue to avoid saying anything. I inquired who Victor was, and Mom said he was someone Dad occasionally did business with, and he had ties to affluent individuals who could improve our family situation. The way she spoke about him as if he were doing us a favor rather than threatening us made me want to shout, but I kept my voice steady and asked more questions about the families he knew. She suggested Victor could set up introductions if I was serious about my strategy, and I assured her I'd think about it, despite the impulse to chuck my phone across the room. After we hung up, I saved the audio and grabbed screenshots of her text, which listed all the ways I should modify myself to attract a wealthy husband. Monday morning, my alarm went off at 6 o'clock, and I changed into clothing and grabbed the packet of documents before walking across campus in the dark to the financial aid building. Evelyn was already there, unlocking her office, and she looked precisely like the portrait on the page, with gray hair tied back and glasses on a chain around her neck. She sat me down and put out all of my documents on her desk, taking notes on a yellow pad and asking questions about when the money vanished and how much was in the account originally. Her face became more concerned as she evaluated everything, and she emphasized that emergency funds were available for unique instances, but they required proof of true hardship, not just parents refusing to pay. She claimed a police record would strengthen my case because it would demonstrate that this was not just a family squabble, but genuine theft of money that belonged to me. I understood I'd have to make things official and engage the police if I wanted to stay at the school, which meant no more pretending it would all go away. After the meeting, I called Aiden from outside the building and informed him about Evelyn's statement about the necessity for a police record to obtain emergency funds. He said he'd call his contact right away, and within an hour, he texted that Detective Lucas Grant had agreed to meet with us unofficially to explore our options. We scheduled a meeting for Tuesday at a coffee shop near school, where we could chat without being overheard and Lucas could explain what getting the police involved would entail. That night, Mom began sending me photographs of outfits she discovered online that she believed would help me attract wealthy boys, and each one revealed more skin than the last. She gave recommendations with each photo, such as, "This one shows your figure, and boys like when you show your legs," and I wanted to vomit while reading them, but I screenshotted everything for proof. I responded back with phony enthusiasm, stating the gowns looked lovely, and asking where I should shop for them, all while compiling evidence of how my own mother was pressuring me to effectively sell myself. On Tuesday morning I met Lucas at the coffee shop and he looked like a normal person in jeans and a button-down shirt rather than a cop uniform, which helped me relax a little. He discussed the legal process for reporting financial crimes, as well as how the involvement of mafia links complicated things, while also making them more serious from a law enforcement standpoint. He offered to assist us in filing what he described as a controlled report, which would provide us with a case number for the financial aid office without instantly sparking arrests or informing my parents that we had gone to the police. His calm demeanor in describing everything made me feel safer, even though he continued warning me about the true dangers of working with organized criminal members. He offered to put up official recording equipment for my next call with my parents and advised me on what questions would help construct a legal case without raising suspicions. He told me not to meet with anyone related to Victor without police protection, because these were not hollow threats, and the danger was very real. That evening, I had to attend a business school mixer to maintain my cover story with my parents, so I invited Sophie from down the hall to accompany me as moral support. She didn't know the whole story, but when I told her I needed a wingman for an awkward social situation, she immediately agreed, because that's the type of friend she was. The mixer was held in the business school lounge, and the room was packed with men in blazers discussing internships and startup ideas, while I stood there in one of my regular outfits, feeling absolutely out of place. I pushed myself to speak with a few of them and laugh at their jokes about market volatility or whatever, while Sophie made faces at me from across the room to keep me from losing it totally. Lucas arrived on campus Wednesday morning with a van full of recording equipment and set everything up in an empty office that the campus police allowed us to use. He demonstrated how the system worked and explained that everything would be legally admissible in court if we ever needed it as evidence against my parents or Victor. He provided me a list of questions to naturally include into the conversation and told me to remain calm, regardless of what my parents replied, as becoming emotional would make them suspicious. I called Mom at 2 p.m., while Lucas was monitoring everything from his laptop, and inquired about the deadline for finding a husband and what would happen to my tuition if I didn't find someone soon enough. She admitted Dad needed the money right away for his obligations, and when I pressed for further information, she used the phrase consequences, which caused Lucas to nod and jot down something because that was the type of language that indicated actual threats existed. Dad cleared his throat and took the phone from Mom, his voice wavering slightly as he began discussing the schedule for receiving money. He said they needed at least half by next week or Sandra would, then he caught himself and hastily stated that certain people would be upset if payments did not begin immediately. Lucas's eyes widened, and he began typing quickly on his laptop while gesturing at me to keep Dad talking. I asked Dad who Sandra was, playing dumb, and he muttered something about just meeting some folks he knew from work before turning the subject back to my looking for a boyfriend. My hands shook as I asked further questions about these folks and their payment expectations, while Lucas documented everything and wrote notes on the name slip. Dad was talking himself into a corner, citing exact sums and dates that matched what Aiden discovered in their bank records. After 20 more minutes of convincing them to provide specifics about the debt and their plan for me, I hung up and sat there staring at Lucas's equipment. He played back the recording to ensure that we understood everything, particularly the point where Dad mentioned Sandro's name, which was spelled Victor. Thursday morning arrived too quickly, and Lucas and I met at the downtown police station at 8 a.m. The facility smelled like stale coffee and floor cleaner, and people sat on plastic chairs, looking exhausted and concerned. Lucas assisted me in completing out the official report, writing down everything about the stolen college fund and the threats from my parents' creditors. The officer taking the report kept asking me to repeat things, as if she couldn't believe the parents would do this to their child. It took 3 hours to complete all of the paperwork and questions, with Lucas staying with me the entire time to ensure that everything was properly documented. When they finally handed me the case number, a big string of digits that made things seem more real, my hands couldn't stop shaking. As we walked out of the station into the brilliant morning sun, I was struck by the reality of reporting my own parents to the police. Lucas placed his hand on my shoulder and reminded me that this was about protecting me from harmful people, not punishing my parents for wrong decisions. I drove immediately to the financial assistance office with my case number and found Evelyn waiting for me with a stack of forms. She'd dedicated her entire morning to assisting me and had already begun the emergency grant paperwork, based on our earlier meeting. She inserted the case number into the system and described how it would expedite my application to the Extraordinary Circumstances Committee. The award would only cover around 60% of this semester's tuition, but with a payment plan and a campus job, I could continue attending. For the first time since that phone call on the bench, I had a glimmer of optimism that I might not have to drop out. Evelyn made copies of everything and handed me a folder with all of my documents, urging me to put it somewhere safe. That afternoon, my phone called as I was attempting to study in my dorm room, and Mom's happy voice made my stomach plummet. She explained that Victor wanted to meet with me to discuss possibilities for our family problem, as if he were a helpful family friend rather than a criminal. She kept expressing how generous he was, how open he was to discuss various arrangements, but I could see the worry beneath her feigned happiness. While still on the phone with Mom, I contacted Lucas, who responded quickly that we needed to manage this meeting. Mom said Victor recommended Saturday at a downtown coffee shop, somewhere public and safe, which almost made me chuckle because safe was so wrong. After hanging up, Lucas called and began planning ways to wire me up and place undercover officers throughout the coffee shop. Meanwhile, Aiden was working on his own angle, spending Thursday night drafting a legal contract for our parents to sign. He emailed me a draft that basically stated that they had taken my education fund without my authorization and owed me the entire amount plus interest. We were both certain that they would never sign it willingly, but Aiden insisted that we attempt the civil path first, before things became more problematic. He was developing various legal tactics simultaneously, preparing for whatever course this catastrophe would take. Lucas and I met at a separate coffee shop on Friday morning to discuss our meeting plans with Victor. The next day, he showed me the tiny microphone that would hook inside my jacket and the recording device, which resembled a phone charger. He had me practice walking and sitting normally while wearing the wire, ensuring sure it didn't show or make a sound. He indicated where the undercover officers would be stationed and showed me images of them so I knew who was there to protect me. He'd be watching from across the street, using binoculars and a radio to coordinate everyone in case something went wrong. The goal was simple but terrifying: get Victor to acknowledge to the debt and threats on film without raising suspicions. That night I sat at my computer, attempting to eat the sandwich I had bought for dinner, but my stomach refused to accept it. The prospect of meeting a real mafia member tomorrow made everything feel surreal and terrifying in a way I'd never experienced before. Sophie knocked on my door around 9 o'clock, observing how quiet I had been all day, and asked if I was all right. She brought a jar of soup from the dining hall and sat on my bed while I pretended to be studying at my desk. She didn't press for details about what was happening. Instead, she kept me company and discussed her own classes and problems with her roommate. Her calm support meant more than she realized, even though I couldn't tell her why I was so terrified. Saturday morning, I awoke at 5 a.m. and couldn't fall back asleep, simply lying there worrying about what might happen. I dressed in the outfit Lucas had approved, making sure the wire was secure and concealed beneath my jacket. Although the coffee shop was only a 10-minute walk from school, it felt like the longest walk I'd ever taken. I arrived 20 minutes early and ordered a small coffee with hands so shaky that I dropped my change. I chose a table near the window, as Lucas had directed, and attempted to appear normal, while my heart hammered. Victor arrived on schedule, dressed like any other middle-aged businessman in khakis and polo shirt. He smiled cordially and shook my hand as if we were having a regular business meeting, then ordered a black coffee and sat across from me. He was nice and charming as he said that my father owed him a lot of money from gambling over the last 2 years. He took out a little notepad and showed me numbers, dates, and payment records that made my stomach flip. He never raised his voice or issued outright threats. But when he explained how family difficulties may affect everyone, he looked at me squarely with cold eyes, making his point obvious. He discussed imaginative options, stating that smart young ladies who understand family commitments could assist in renegotiating tough loans. When I asked what he meant by restructuring, he grinned and said that certain social structures might drastically reduce financial commitments. He even mentioned that if I was wise about marrying into the appropriate family, my father's debt could be treated differently. Then he added that all payments had been processed through Powell Credit Union, which provided the paper trail Lucas desired. I nodded and tried to appear attentive while feeling nauseous, knowing the wire was recording every vile phrase about selling me to pay Dad's gambling debt. Victor drank his coffee and rose up, explaining that he would allow our family time to examine the possibilities he had offered. After he departed, I stayed for another 5 minutes, as Lucas had instructed, and then walked out, attempting to appear calm. The same dark automobile I'd seen earlier was parked across the street, with someone sitting inside monitoring the coffee shop. I walked back to school, following the route Lucas had planned, and he contacted me 10 minutes later to confirm they had also seen the vehicle. He claimed they would immediately increase security measures and have someone check my dorm. The fact that actual criminals were watching my travels and knowing where I lived made things seem more scary than I'd expected. Sunday dragged on, with me checking my phone every few minutes and leaping at any disturbance outside my dorm room. Monday morning, I traveled to Powell Credit Union with the account numbers Aiden had given me, expecting to obtain transaction records that would show Dad used my tuition funds to pay his gambling debts. The structure was one of those little branches in a strip mall between a nail salon and a sandwich business. I approached the teller window and requested copies of withdrawals from my college savings account, slipping my ID across the counter. The teller, a woman in her 40s with warm eyes, wrote on her computer for a minute before frowning. She stated that due to privacy regulations, she could not provide me with any information unless I was a member of the account, or had a court order, despite the fact that she could see my name was associated with it. I asked if there was a way around it, but she shook her head, looking truly apologetic as she explained that federal banking laws were stringent on this issue. I departed empty-handed and called Lucas from my car to inform him what had happened. He said he'd start the subpoena paperwork immediately once, and Aiden would look into civil legal avenues for obtaining the records. That afternoon, Aiden drove to our parents' house with a document he had drawn up acknowledging that they had misappropriated my college fund and owed me money. I paced back and forth between my workstation and bed in my dorm room while waiting for his call. When he finally called 2 hours later, his voice was strained with rage. He claimed Dad laughed at the document and refused to sign it, calling us theatrical and ungrateful for everything they had done for us. Mom began crying throughout the fight, stating, "We were tearing the family apart over money." Then something unexpected happened, changing everything. Aiden stated that Mom immediately jumped up and went to their bedroom, returning with a small black notebook she had hidden in her dresser. She flung it on the table and burst into tears, saying she had been keeping account of every single wager, every loss to Victor, and every payment they'd made with my tuition money. The journal contained dates spanning 2 years, with numbers increasing as Dad's debt grew. Mom had scribbled down phone numbers, meeting locations, and even the license plate numbers of cars that arrived to their house for collection. She'd known all along, but she felt trapped and afraid as she watched Dad's spiral and Victor's demands escalated. Aiden photographed every page as Mom sobbed and Dad shouted at her for betraying him. The entries closely matched the dates and quantities withdrawn from my college account, resulting in a perfect paper trail from my savings to Victor's pocket. Some entries included remarks like, "used Rachel's money," or "took from college fund," that made it impossible to dispute what they'd done. Tuesday morning I visited with Evelyn at the financial assistance office and gave her copies of the ledger pages Aiden had supplied me. She carefully perused them, her countenance becoming more serious as she read each page. She stated that this was exactly the type of evidence that would qualify me for maximal emergency relief because it demonstrated illegal theft of educational funds. She made copies for my file and summoned a colleague who specialized in guiding crime victims through the university system. The woman identified herself as a campus advocate and offered to help coordinate the police investigation, the financial aid office, and my teachers if I required extensions or adjustments. For the first time since all began, I felt like the school was completely behind me and striving to keep me enrolled. That night, when I was studying in my room, Aiden called, his voice shaking. Someone had slashed all 4 tires on his car and left a message under the windshield reading, "Family pays family debts" in block letters. He'd already phoned the cops to submit a report, and they were investigating it as witness intimidation related to our case against Victor. Lucas arrived within an hour and advised us to evacuate to a secure spot immediately. He drove us to a modest apartment building on the other side of town that the police used to house witnesses who required security. The apartment was simple but clean, with 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and bars on all of the windows. Lucas demonstrated the security system and provided us with a phone number where we could reach officers in less than 3 minutes. Lucas brought me up early on Wednesday morning to prepare for another recorded meeting with Victor, during which I was supposed to give him a partial payment to purchase time. The underlying purpose was to encourage him to be more detailed about his threats and illegal conduct, as the earlier audio had not been clear enough to support severe charges. We spent 2 hours in a conference room at the police station practicing various approaches and reactions. Lucas advised me on how to ask foolish questions that would compel Victor to explain his illicit activities. I worked on being cool even when Lucas pretended to threaten me, learning to control my breathing and keep my hands firm. The meeting was scheduled for that afternoon in a different coffee shop. This one was closer to university, so there'd be more witnesses. I arrived 10 minutes early, wearing the wire again, and ordered a little tea that I didn't much want. Victor arrived on time, sitting across from me with the same fake friendly smile. I took out an envelope containing $500 Lucas had given me from his funds and passed it over the table while requesting receipt. Victor chuckled and stated they don't use paperwork in his business since receipts cause headaches for everyone concerned. I pretended to be dumb and inquired as to how I could demonstrate that I had made a payment without providing evidence. He leaned closer and stated that his firm was based on trust and reputation, stating that he had methods of collecting from uncooperative families that did not require courts or documentation. When I inquired what kind of approaches, he grinned and stated that innovative solutions worked best, and that sometimes individuals needed motivation other than money to pay off their obligations. He said that accidents occurred when people did not take their responsibilities seriously, and that family members sometimes find themselves in terrible situations. I nodded and inquired about the direct impact of my father's debt on my brother and me. Victor stated that family debts were family concerns, and that everyone contributed to finding answers in some way. After he left with the money, I sat for another 5 minutes before walking back to the safe house, where Lucas was waiting. He stated that Victor's statements about accidents and family members incurring consequences were precisely what they required for criminal threat charges. On Thursday morning, we all went to the courts, where Aiden's lawyer presented our evidence to a judge, asking an emergency order. The judge examined the ledger, police reports, and transcripts of the recorded discussions with Victor. After an hour of arguments on both sides, she issued a temporary restraining order, freezing my parents' remaining assets while the criminal case was being investigated. This meant they couldn't sell the house, empty their bank accounts, or transfer any property until the court determined how much they owed me. My phone immediately started ringing with calls from both parents, which I did not answer. Aiden now handles all correspondence through his lawyer, ensuring that everything is formal and documented. Friday morning, Mom's lawyer phoned Aiden's lawyer, offering to collaborate with the police investigation in exchange for leniency on any charges she could face. She provided a list of Victor's phone numbers, the addresses where Dad met him to gamble, and the names of other persons Dad owed money to from card games. She even offered them the dates and times of forthcoming games Dad intended to attend in an attempt to recoup his losses. Her betrayal of Dad felt inevitable, but it was still terrible to see my family come apart as a result of his addiction and their misdeeds. That afternoon, I sat in the financial aid office while Evelyn processed my emergency aid application and all accompanying documents. The computer system approved enough money to cover this semester's tuition, plus a payment plan for the remainder of my degree. She printed the confirmation and walked me to the bursar's office, where the hold on my account was removed. I could officially stay at the school, even though money would be tight and I'd have to work more hours. Walking out of the administrative building with my registration secured felt like winning a battle in a war that was far from done. Saturday morning, my phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. The letter read, "Disappointed in your family's choices," and included a photo. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was a photo of my dorm building taken from across the quad. I quickly called Lucas, who urged me to forward everything without responding. He documented everything as proof and promised to get an undercover officer on campus by noon. The threat felt serious, but at least I wasn't alone. Aiden drove in that afternoon, and we spent the entire weekend working with a lawyer he knew through his firm. We sat at his kitchen table, reviewing each paper as the lawyer took notes. He suggested we negotiate a solution in which Victor would receive a portion of the frozen assets if he agreed to pay the debt and signed a no-contact order. It was not justice, but it might have provided us with protection. The lawyer typed the offer on his laptop and forwarded it to Victor's counsel on Sunday night. We were not expecting a speedy response, yet it arrived on Tuesday morning. Victor's counsel agreed to discuss, but requested 70% of the frozen assets. When I panicked and called Lucas, he stated it was actually wonderful news. It implied Victor intended to avoid a thorough inquiry. The lawyer countered with 50% and included a legal no-contact agreement, making any further threats a criminal. The negotiation discussion on Wednesday was held at the lawyer's downtown office. I sat between Aiden and Lucas, and Victor sat across the conference table with his lawyer. Nobody shook hands. Victor appeared smaller under the fluorescent lights than he did at the coffee shop. His lawyer did most of the talking, while Victor simply nodded. After 2 hours of back and forth, they reached an agreement to pay 60% of the frozen assets through formal methods. This would generate a paper trail that the government could follow. Victor signed the no-contact order directly in front of us. Any subsequent interaction would be prosecutable. On Thursday morning, I went to the bursar's office with my emergency grant paperwork. The woman behind the desk processed the deposit and assisted me in setting up a payment plan for the balance. I would have to pay $200 every month, which meant getting a job. She indicated that the library was hiring and provided me the supervisor's phone number. I contacted right away and scheduled an interview for that afternoon. The library job paid the minimum pay and provided flexible hours around classes. My manager recognized that I would need time off for legal reasons and indicated it was acceptable. The preliminary hearing on Friday took place at the downtown courthouse. My parents were at a separate table with their lawyer while the judge evaluated everything. Dad looked like he had aged 10 years in the last month. Mom kept her eyes down the entire time. The judge ordered them to sign a lien on their home to secure my claim to the stolen monies. This meant that if they sold the house, I would receive my college funds first. Dad's hand shook as he signed the paperwork. Mom appeared relieved that it was becoming official. They had to admit what they did in legal words directly in court. The following week they began their mandated treatment programs. Both parents were required to attend Gamblers Anonymous meetings as part of their plea agreement. Dad attended meetings every Tuesday and Thursday night. Mom had to attend family counseling sessions for those who supported addicts. The court would verify their attendance records once a month. Dad finally realized he had a gambling issue after years of denial. Mom had to admit that she had helped hide his addiction and made excuses for him. It was the first step towards them accepting responsibility. Lucas called on Wednesday afternoon to share some surprising news. Victor had been nabbed at a traffic stop the night before. The officers found illicit items in his car, and our proof exacerbated his issues. He'd been dealing with his own court matters for months, so he was too busy to bother us. The immediate threat seemed to be passing. My parents' lawyer contacted Aiden with a proposition for future communication. They proposed only written updates, with no direct interaction for the time being. Any future relationship would be contingent on their finishing their treatment program successfully. The lawyer stated they understood if I needed time to recover. I agreed to the terms since I wanted time to consider everything. Aiden backed my decision and stated that there was no urgency to forgive them. Thursday, I went to the registrar's office to lessen my course load for the remainder of the semester. Dropping from 5 to 4 lessons would help me better manage my stress. It meant graduating a semester late, but it seemed insignificant in the grand scheme of things. The advisor understood and advised me on which class to drop. I kept psychology, creative writing, and statistics, but eliminated the elective. This allowed me extra hours for the library job, which was required for the payment plan. Following the turmoil, the routine of organizing books felt typical and comforting. My supervisor was a quiet woman who did not ask personal questions. She showed me the technique for sorting returns, and then left me alone to work. Other pupils arrived and left without understanding my story. I assisted them with finding books and checking out stuff, just like any other student worker. The usual routine of scanning barcodes and pushing the book cart between stacks felt like the most tranquil thing in my life. Aiden called Friday afternoon while I was sorting returns and told me he'd decided to retake the bar test next month because he'd put everything on hold to help me with this mess. He asked if I could help him study, and I immediately said yes because helping each other felt like the only positive thing going on. We devised a plan in which I would question him on legal words during my library breaks, and he would assist me with schoolwork via video conferences in the evenings. I produced flashcards from his old bar prep materials, and we'd go through them together, with him answering questions and me checking the answers. The routine provided us with something normal to focus on other than lawyers, court dates, and worrying if our parents would ever be okay. After 3 weeks of following this new pattern, I returned to school housing with a new roommate who had no idea what had happened. The girl was kind enough and generally stayed to herself, which worked for me because I wasn't ready to explain why I woke up panicked about money. Sophie came over to help me unpack and hang posters, attempting to make the room appear normal, even though nothing was. She brought string lights and assisted me in arranging my desk the manner I preferred, refraining from asking too many questions when I became quiet. I started visiting a counselor at Student Health Services twice a week to deal with things, and she kept assuring me that healing would not be quick or easy. The counselor taught me breathing exercises to help me cope with panic attacks, and helped me understand that what my parents did was not my fault, despite how it felt at times. That same week, I returned to the bursar's office, where they formalized my payment plan with specific amounts I could afford. My library work paid $200 each month, plus a little loan, would cover everything, but I'd have to graduate a semester late. The woman behind the counter printed out all of the paperwork and highlighted the critical bits, then demonstrated how to set up automatic payments so I wouldn't miss any. Seeing everything official with stamps and signatures made me feel more secure than I had in weeks, because no one could take this away from me. My parents' lawyer delivered a big envelope to my dorm containing a formal apology letter they had prepared as part of their plea agreement. I sat on my bed, staring at it for 20 minutes before opening it, my hands shaking slightly. They accepted responsibility for taking my college cash and apologized for trying to force me to marry someone for money and putting me in danger with their gambling debts. The letter was 3 pages long and included a lot of legal terminology as well as their actual words. I read it once and then filed it in a folder at the bottom of my desk drawer, not ready to forgive them, but glad they'd admitted what they did. Aiden and I discussed it that night and agreed to consider contact again when they completed their treatment programs, but not before. My creative writing class became a place where I could finally put all of my anguish to good use. The lecturer told us to write about a life-changing experience, and I wrote about sitting on that bench when my parents called. I didn't hold back, pouring all of my betrayal, fear, and wrath into the words, making it as real on the page as it felt in my life. When I read it in workshop, The audience became silent, and the professor described it as powerful and sincere, noting, "Trauma creates the most honest art." After class, 3 distinct students approached me independently, each giving their own story about parents who had let them down, stolen from them, or prioritized addiction over family. Lucas called the next morning with an update on the sentencing, explaining that Mom's cooperation with the investigation ensured she received probation rather than jail time. Dad had to do required gambling addiction therapy as well as community service, but he escaped prison, which seemed too easy despite Lucas's claim that it was rather normal for first-time financial offenses. I was both surprised and pleased that they would not be going to jail, because having parents in prison would be difficult, in and of itself. Lucas stated that the matter was now officially concluded, and Victor's group had essentially disbanded following his arrest, thus we no longer needed to be concerned about retaliation. That weekend, Aiden drove down, and we went to the bank jointly to open a joint education savings account in both our names. We set it up such that any withdrawal required both signatures, and monthly statements were sent to both of our addresses, making everything clear. We each contributed $50 to begin, which wasn't much but seemed significant as a symbol of repairing what was stolen. Every month we'd add whatever we could afford, him from his new employment after passing the law exam, and me from library salary after paying my bills. A month later, I found myself going past the bench outside the library where I had received the call. The same students passed by with their coffee and backpacks, concerned about tests, relationships, and other typical college issues, while I stood there feeling like a different person than the girl who had sat there before. I contacted Aiden right away, simply to hear his voice. Standing in the precise spot where it all began, I reminded myself that I was no longer alone and would never be again. We maintained all of our safety equipment in place, even after the danger had passed, because being cautious had become habit. We got new phones with new numbers, checked in with each other every day, stayed alert of who was near us, and met in public locations to visit lawyers or sign papers. Lucas contacted once a month to ensure that nothing new had occurred, and to remind us that we could contact him if anything seemed wrong. 6 weeks after the first phone call, my life had settled into a new rhythm that felt almost normal. I spent 2 months working extra shifts at the library and studying harder than ever before. Aiden called one Thursday afternoon while I was shelving books to inform me that he had received his bar exam results in the mail. He'd failed on his second attempt and already had 3 interviews set up with other firms. The following week, he began working at a firm that dealt with financial crimes and fraud. He texted me images of his new workplace, which overlooks the parking lot, and said our family mess had taught him more than any textbook. I felt happy seeing him in his suit and tie after all he had gone through to get there. My own grades began to improve once I was able to focus on school rather than survival. The statistics professor approached me after class and informed me that my exam scores had improved by 30%. In creative writing, I submitted a narrative about trust that made the entire workshop fall silent as I read it. Instead of the hasty work from before, my psychology essays received remarks like, insightful and well-researched. By finals week, I was pulling all-nighters at the library for the same reasons as everyone else. The grades were posted just before winter break, and I made the dean's list with a 3.8 GPA. I screenshotted the email and forwarded it to Aiden, who responded with 5 exclamation points. Lucas called the same week with news of Victor's group collapsing. The arrest had scared off the majority of his gang, and the rest were either hiding or leaving town. He'd checked with his contacts, and no one was talking about our family anymore. When Victor was arrested and his lawyers became preoccupied with more pressing matters, the entire operation came to a halt. I could finally stop looking over my shoulder as I walked to class. Spring registration opened, and I enrolled in Introduction to Law, along with my other requirements. The pre-law consultant assisted me in developing a 3-year strategy to complete all of the prerequisites for law school applications. Aiden sent me his old LSAT prep materials and recommended the best lecturers. Every Sunday we discussed different areas of law and what type of lawyer I wanted to be. He vowed to help me study for the LSAT when the time came, and that I'd do better than he did. 3 weeks into the spring semester, Mom sent a letter through her treatment program. My name was printed on the envelope in her weak handwriting, which felt thin between my fingers. Inside she had written 2 pages about finishing her program and figuring out what she had done wrong. She suggested we meet for coffee when I felt ready, but she understood if I never wanted to see her again. At the bottom, she mentioned that Dad was doing better as well, and hadn't bet in 5 months. I gently folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer, among my notebooks. Maybe someday I'll be ready to drink that coffee, but not now. Sophie saw I was quiet that night and brought me cookies from the dining hall. We sat on my bed, and I finally told her everything from the start. The phone call, the marriage plan, the mafia, recording my parents, and everything with Victor. She listened without interrupting, even as her eyes widened at the hazardous sections. When I finished, she hugged me and said she had known something was wrong but had never realized it would be this horrible. She said she was concerned when I kept vanishing and appeared agitated, but she didn't know how to help. Having someone who knew the whole truth but still treated me normally made me feel better than I imagined. We began having weekly coffee dates where I could discuss legal issues or family trouble without mentioning the context. Summer came and went, and I worked full-time at the library while also taking 2 online classes to catch up on credits. Aiden assisted me in finding a cheaper apartment near campus that I could afford with my library salary and financial aid. We painted it jointly over the weekend, and he added extra locks to all the windows. By August I had saved enough for the following semester and felt secure for the first time in nearly a year. When sophomore year began, I arrived onto school feeling very different from the fearful girl from the previous fall. My backpack held literature that I had purchased with money, gained through honest work. The pre-law classes were difficult but engaging, and my teachers knew me by name. I had a regular study group and friends who invited me to parties, but no one tried to marry me for money. Every week, Aiden and I talked about his cases, my classes, and occasionally even trivial matters like movies or sports. My parents stayed in their programs and sent information through their lawyers, but they maintained their distance as planned. As I traversed the routes that had horrified me just a year before, the campus felt comfortable and familiar. Standing outside the library where all began, I felt truly joyful and free of anyone else's intentions for my life.